Do you worry about things like making broccoli sexy?
Well, it's the first time I've ever heard the word broccoli and sexy in one sentence.
So if you've ever picked up a head of Irish broccoli in a supermarket, chances are that it was grown by Paul Brophy. He's Ireland's broccoli baron, and he's my guest on this episode of Food Matters. Hi there, I'm Mick Kelly, the founder of GIY. Food Matters is the podcast series where we meet the people who are reconnecting us with real, healthy, sustainable food. They tell us why food matters to them and why it should matter to you too. Paul Brophy grows almost 11 million broccoli plants every year. That's 75% of our national broccoli crop on over 600 acres of land. Not bad for a lad who started on just 5 acres a few decades ago. In this episode, Paul shares the story of how all that happened and how it shaped his view of the food system.
Our competing products are ultra-processed takeaways, fast food that's saturated fats, full of salt, full of sugar, and the marketing convinces the people that they're loving it, and they're not. And their bodies aren't.
Are we that time poor that we can't differentiate between an Irish head of broccoli and a Spanish head of broccoli? Like, it says it on the label. Like,
yeah.
In fairness, it's not going to take 15 seconds to figure that out. It's going to take like 2.
20 cent more on a head of cabbage, cauliflower is a lot to ask when a Mars bar or a bar of chocolate is twice the price of a piece of broccoli. I fail to understand how it's been cheapened so much.
Do you think empty supermarket shelves are a feature of our future or not?
Yes, I do. And I think they're necessary.
This is a warts and all account of the joys and frustrations of being a world-class food system player, dealing with retailers, rising costs and the effects of climate change, which incidentally Paul thinks could present an opportunity for Irish growers. Fundamentally, Paul Brophy feels the food system is broken, and he has a lot to say about how it could be fixed. So I grow broccoli at home, or at least I try to grow it, because it's definitely a little bit of a diva. It's very sensitive to temperature fluctuations, more susceptible to pests, and a very thirsty plant. And overall, it's just a little bit harder to grow. So based on that, I was curious about why Paul, out of all the veg he could have picked, decided to go large on broccoli.
I suppose they say where there's problems, there's opportunities. And I have followed the opportunity out of all gardeners' problems. They can't crack it, but it is a bit of a diva.
Yeah.
And it likes what it likes, and it doesn't perform if it doesn't get those conditions. And we've really, I suppose, honed our skills on specialising in the little detail that gives the results and gets you the commercial yields and the quality.
Yeah. What does it like and what does it not like as a crop?
It doesn't like really hot weather.
Okay.
The varieties that we grow when it gets too hot, it tends to go brown and get yellowing in it. It's certainly when it's a young plant, it doesn't like cold, so we sort of counteract that by putting fleeces over our early crops to protect it from frost. It hates it too wet and it hates it too dry. So we pick some very, very free draining fields, and we try to source sustainable sources of water to keep the crop watered if we get the other. So we're suppose hedging our bets in everything we do. The season is I suppose the Northern European season is mid-June to mid-November. We can produce right to that season, so we can cover the whole Northern European season for the supermarkets or our other customers. And that means that, you know, if they switch from Southern Europe to Northern Europe, it's one switch and it's seamless change, should be a seamless change over for them. Whereas if we were where we're located in Naas, we would be too frosty to grow cauliflower all year round.
Okay.
We're not near the sea. So we have a nice, I suppose, we're protected from the harsh east winds in the spring. And because we're not producing it in January, February, the heavy frosts aren't an issue where we are. And the season finishes up in mid-November, so we're out before the chance of a late frost or early for the winter, but late for us in production would affect us.
So one of the times that we filmed on your farm for, I think it was for Grow Cook Eat originally, I was lucky enough to meet your father. So you took over the farm like, what was it like when you did that first? Like, what was the farm like, and what was being grown back then? I'm guessing it wasn't specialised in broccoli at that stage.
There wasn't a vegetable to be seen for 20 miles around. I came home to help out when Dad was diagnosed with brucellosis, and he needed to destock the cattle species off the farm, and he asked me would I help him out. And I had a garden before I went to study horticulture, so Dad had sort of joined in and helped me. Particularly loved working in the greenhouse and growing his tomatoes and some of the protected crops. And he naturally gravitated towards what I was doing. He every time I made a decision to drop sheep production, reduce the cereals, he backed me every time, and he believed in what I wanted to do was the correct thing, and never second questioned me on, I don't know if that's a good idea. It was nothing but encouragement. And he ended up coming to work for me, which sounds crazy, but he retired out of the farming. He wanted to stay busy, and he said to me, look, is there anything I can do, that'll help you out and keep me busy and out of under your mother's feet? And so it was a win-win for everybody. So small deliveries. Dad would.
Why did you major on veg? Was that something you'd enjoyed growing yourself at home first?
Well, I started as a hobby gardener at 12 years of age, growing a few vegetable crops, and I went and studied a general horticulture course in Warrenstown College.
Yeah.
And the veg always, to me, I suppose, was the biggest opportunity for me to go back home and start something at home. Fruit was a long-term investment. Mushrooms was a capital investment. Nursery, there was a couple of big nurseries in the area, so it was going to be very competitive to establish a niche in that. And
nursery being plant producing ornamental
plants, yeah. And then heated glass was capital investment, which I didn't have.
Yeah.
The farm would have been financially in a very poor place at the time. We were looking at 18% interest rates in 83, and land values very low. So what we needed on the farm, we had sale of cattle, once or twice a year, sale of sheep once or twice a year, and cereal sales once a year. So we'd no constant cash flow, and it was missing from the business. And the little bit of business that we did when we were studying college, I knew that if we could develop a cash flow, which the vegetable production could give us, it would be year round, keep some money coming in.
Yeah. And so it was mixed veg at that stage, though. You were growing a bit of everything.
It was a mixed market garden. I had everything.
What kind of acreage at that stage?
5 acres.
Wow.
With no equipment, because we had no specialist horticulture equipment. We had a plough, and that was it.
And where were you selling the veg then?
I suppose I was a little bit before my time. I was supplying some of the restaurants, but I had a van and I went around the housing estates, and I sold from my van to people, and developed a really good rapport with my then girlfriend at the time, and we used to have great fun. She could sell sand to the Arabs, and she was.
You grew it, she sold it.
She sold it, yeah.
That's brilliant. And so how did it get from that sort of, market gardener, as you say, to specialising in broccoli? Was that a kind of a needs must? You needed to get bigger, you needed to get more specialised.
The business wasn't scalable, and I was the heart and soul of it. So if myself or the girlfriend didn't turn up at the door, the people wouldn't buy from a stranger. They were buying from us and the story of what we told about what we were growing and selling. And there was no point in thinking I could put 20 vans on the road doing all the housing estates between Naas and Dublin. That wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And I know, because when I took a week off and I put somebody different on it, the sales just imploded. Yeah.
Wow.
So it wasn't a scalable business model. And I used to have surplus products. So if I had a flush of cauliflower, I knew I was only going to sell 3 dozen in my vegetable round on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And if I had 10 dozen ready for sale, I had developed some markets for those. And at the time, the supermarkets didn't have the same hold on pricing, and if product was scarce, you got paid very well. So sometimes I was better to short my house round and sell my products on the wholesale market and collect good money on it. So I sort of thought that the scalable model was producing for backdoor into supermarkets because there was no central distribution. We're talking about 1983, 84. And there was no backdoor. So you just developed a rapport with a local charger. And sure, he was delighted because he was getting ripped off by a van man coming down from Dublin telling him the prices were this, that and the other. We were a day to 2 days fresher, and sometimes we'd cut the order. If we ran out, we'd top up. So again, we got into that model. We dropped our house round and our van round, and we started to supply into 3 or 4 local supermarkets. At that time, there was 4 greengrocers in Naas, all thriving along with the main supermarket, all on the main street.
Not many of them now left, I'd say.
There's one left in Naas, and I think there was 5 butchers on the main street. There's none left in the main street in Naas. So the fabric of the town has been ripped apart by out-of-town shopping centres with free parking, and it's changed beyond recognition. But we, like anything, we had to change, and we changed. As that started to, I suppose, change, we realised we've got to get some direct routes to some of these supermarkets, and the supermarket in the town at the time was Super Quinn, so we were just supplying backdoor into Naas, and we approached to see could we supply into the main depot that was distributing out, and we got a contract to do some, well, I'd say a contract, it was just a verbal agreement to do some broccoli for them. And we just found ourselves specialising more and more what we were doing well, what we were commercially getting deals. But one thing I would always have been good at was the figures, and in my quiet downtime during the winter, I'd microanalyse everything and what we did well and what we didn't, why we didn't. And I suppose it was a bit like, teasing out the small detail and then deciding, we'd go forward. So we started to see it, I suppose, narrow into, at the time, it was broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage and Brussels sprouts. And
so a brassica specialisation.
Yeah, now that created its own problems then, because we were not... we had a small farm that we had to rotate, so once we went outside that we had to start renting land, and that created its own problems, but also its own opportunities, in that it opened up, I could expand, and once I rented enough fresh ground, I was able to expand. But the problems were we had to have more equipment, more machinery, and be more mobile, and harder to manage crops when they weren't at home under your nose, with lots of losses where there was lots of rabbits in particular areas that we didn't know the land and the lie of the land and what pests and diseases were present in the areas.
So fast forward to 2024, talk to me about some of the numbers we're talking about now, because they're just staggering. Like, I've heard you called the broccoli king, which there should be a Netflix series about, but anyway.
I wouldn't use the word broccoli king. I think it's a bit pretentious. Broccoli baron might be better.
All right, that's even better. So, like, what are the kind of numbers involved, like land wise?
Land wise,
from your 5 acres.
Yeah, from 5 acres up to over 600.
Wow.
670, 680.
And that's, as you said, land some of it's land you're leasing, and some of
it's all land leasing, swapping, working with tillage farmers who want rotation, doing what's called share farming. And the figures, I just did a quick tot because I sort of guessed that question had come up. 10,200,000 plants this year. That's what we're
all from seed.
All from seed, all start in the nursery, all transplanted, all hand harvested, all done over a 22 week period of the summer, with huge teams of staff that we bring in to do that job.
That's incredible. So of the overall broccoli crop in Ireland, what percentage do you do?
I would say 65%.
Wow. Okay. So if people are buying Irish broccoli in the supermarket, 65% of the time it's probably yours. Yeah,
there's 1 or 2 supermarkets we don't supply, and it's not because we've had big rows of them. There's other guys have those markets, and I'm quite happy to leave them have them. They're working away, doing a good job, and some supermarkets we supply 50% into, and there's other guys doing them. And there's a living in it for everybody.
So there's I know with some of the tomato guys, for example, commercial tomato growers in Ireland, they're buying in seedlings, so somebody else has got them to that sort of stage. But you're literally growing the broccoli, nearly 11 million broccoli plants from a single seed.
Now it's mechanized to a high degree.
Yeah.
We would have a seeding machine that'll place all the seeds, but then the managing of the plants in the grow houses is very intensive and very specialist, but it gives us control, and particularly if we get bad weather, that we can slow down plants, speed them up, control everything so that they're in prime condition when they go out. The transplanting, when I started back in 1983, I went out with a dibber and I hand planted, and I know I could plant an acre a week, and I had a cast iron back with a hinge on it at the time. Today we go out and we can put a 250,000 plants in a day with the only fully automatic vegetable brassica planter in the country.
My God.
And it's an incredible piece of technology.
So it literally carpets a field in hours.
In hours, yeah.
And I've seen as well when we filmed, which I've seen the harvesting happening, and the guys walking along behind the machine. They're literally cutting the stalk. Like, how long does it take from when they do that to that being on the shelf in the supermarket? In
an ideal world, 2-3 days.
Okay.
Sometimes 4 or 5. But we have a bit of flexibility in when we take it in. It's taken back to the pack house and it's chilled immediately. And once you get the field heat out of it, you have 5 or 6 days, of latitude. And you need that because broccoli doesn't crop. We don't cut all that crop in one harvest like you would have seen. We would pass through that 3 times and picking the optimum sized heads each pass we go through. And then you might plant every week to 10 days, but you're not guaranteed that you'll get a sequence of harvest following the planting, because it might be particularly dry or particularly wet, and the planting that follows one mightn't subsequently follow it after. An example of it last year, we had one small field and we planted it, and somebody disconnected a bird scare in the field and the pigeons attacked it, and it came 2 weeks out of sequence, and everything was planned and then went yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
it's incredible how quick that happens. And like one of the things, I think I've said this to you before, that a lot of the science tells us we need to be eating more plants, and brassicas in particular are fantastic for your health, of which broccoli is one of that sort of family of veg. So we have this like incredibly nutritious, fresh Irish product on the shelves, he said, from mid-June till mid-November. Like the value of that, I don't think we necessarily appreciate. Like,
we don't cherish it. And I mean, you take our competing products on the dinner plate are ultra processed foods and takeaways, fast food that's saturated fats, full of salt, full of sugar, and the marketing convinces the people that they're loving it, and they're not. And their bodies aren't, and it's apparent in the obesity crisis. And we only have to look at the States and what's happening here, and how the generation that we're raising now, eat fast food more readily than we ever ate it. And it was a once a month or once in a Christmas time treat in our households that you went out for something to eat. Now it's a matter of every day.
So talk to me about the role weather plays in the business, because you've mentioned it a couple of times there. At that kind of scale, like a normal weather event presumably could be catastrophic, but also about climate change, then the increased kind of unpredictability. What in general, first of all, what's the weather impact?
Well, to talk about the 10.2 million plants, they're all scheduled. So we have them in the grow houses where they're all controlled. So you take the year of the beast from the east, and it starts Patrick's Day, which is our targeted day to get out planting. And we've, around us in Naas, we had 30-40 centimetres of snow that drifted. Our first concern was that the grow houses were going to collapse. There was such a snow load on them. And we did it in rotation, but we spent 3 nights taking the snow away. We have come up with strategies since to deal with it, turn on heaters and melt it before it accumulates. But that delayed us that year. And we went from a month late planting in 2018 to the biggest drought in the summer of 2018 that we'd seen in the country for years and years, since I think the 70s. And we had horrendous issues with continuity, quality, but everybody had.
Because at particular times of the year, broccoli is needs a lot of watering.
It does. When it comes to harvest, with the last 3 weeks of its growing season, it needs an adequate supply of water to fill the head and to get the quality into the head size. So you have to have water available.
So that drought came right wrong time.
It came in June and July, and we're still planting our autumn and early winter crops. and we're harvesting our early crops, and you're trying to decide, you're like playing God, where do you put the water? Because if you don't put on the young plants, they'll die within 24 hours.
Yeah.
If you prioritise all the young plants, your harvested crop is going to suffer. So we were working around the clock. We just got into shifts of 2 people, and we worked around the clock.
And so you said 450 acres, I think, is it?
No,
hectares.
No, sorry, it's 670 acres of broccoli.
670 acres. So I'm guessing that isn't all like in one location.
No.
So this is spread across Kildare.
It goes from South Kildare, touching on the Laois border, up to Kildare, touching on the Wicklow border, and then North Kildare, touching on the Meath border. But based around a sort of a 25-30 mile radius of Naas.
So getting water to the it's not running a hose. Like, how are you shipping water around?
You have to find rivers that can sustain pumping probably 20,000 gallons an hour to run an irrigator. That's 100,000 litres.
Yeah.
We calculated that we pumped last summer, which wasn't a big drought, that we pumped 7 million gallons of water for the period of June that we had the water in, and that was just a snapshot of it. And we three machines going pumping night and day.
Wow. And so what has climate change done then to the sort of the frequency and the nature of the weather events that you're getting?
We're seeing the extremes. We had the wettest March. We had 5 named storms in January. If your business was affected by that, we lost 2 covers on 2 of our grow houses. But if ever there was a time, it was in January where we had time to replace them. We see extremes in drought, extremes in cold, extremes in wet, and more frequent weather events than I believe. Our season is longer also, but that's an advantage for us. We're now 2, maybe 3 weeks longer than when I started production.
Okay.
And that's because we're getting milder autumns. The cut-off date for us used to be the 31st of October, so we're getting 2 weeks there and possibly a week in June where we can get out earlier.
Yeah.
And that's one of the effects. But there's opportunities in climate change, because climate change is affecting all of Europe. And if you go down to Spain, water is their biggest challenge. A colleague of mine has a vegetable production farm in Portugal, and I went to see him this time last year. And he's rationed his water, and he's working on 40% of what he was using 10 years ago. So he's to prioritise that water on the crops that he's growing. And if it gets worse, he has to stop. It hadn't rained for something like 200 days when we were there with him, and that was the period for them that they filled their reservoirs and they built up their water reserves, and they were in big trouble.
Yeah.
So that's going to restrict production in Europe, not just in Ireland, and it's a global picture. Global warming is not just.
We don't have it as, from a broccoli perspective, we don't have it as bad as some countries in Europe.
I actually think it's going to produce an opportunity for us. That if we mitigate the risks of drought, and we know where there's sustainable rivers and water supplies, as it gets hotter and drier in the summer, more and more land comes out of production. And Spain used to continuously supply up to the end of June, and always we were disadvantaged if we started too early because we overlapped with the end of the Spanish season. Now they're asking us to come back, start earlier, because they are rationing their water, so they're prioritising it into the times that they get the best yields, and they don't get their best yields when it gets to 40 degrees in Spain and they're trying to produce broccoli in June, so they're better off to step out of it. I was on a farm in November in Spain, and they have a quota of water, and they used to grow broccoli in the winter, organic broccoli in the mountains all year round, and melons. They've stopped growing the melons because they're using the water that they were allocated for the melons to fill their reservoirs for their broccoli. They've stopped producing organic broccoli in July and August because they had to pump it 4 kilometres up into the mountains where it was too hot in the lowlands, but they were producing it in the cooler climates up in the mountains. But they've stopped it because water is so costly. And it's 4 times the price now that it was. They buy it by the cubic metre. So that's where there's opportunity if we survive what we're going through at the moment.
Well, that's a very good segue into, like, what are the big challenges? Because we know, I mean, you might give us the bigger picture for veg growers in general, but like, what are the big challenges for your business at the moment?
There's probably climate change is a challenge, but I believe it's also an opportunity. I believe that there's a huge environmental challenge in what we're doing. We're losing lots of chemistry that we would have used in insecticides and in weed killers, and that's where technology plays a role, where we forecast these events, and we use an integrated crop management approach where we only use what we have when we need to use it, and we're not carte blanche going out and doing it. So that's the challenge. There's the opportunity. Labour is a massive challenge. Nobody wants to do the work we ask people to do on the farm. We have to bring in staff seasonally for that. Seasonal staff, there's a housing crisis in the country. It's a massive issue. Romanian family aren't going to come over and work for me unless I have everything organised for them. So
including housing.
Wow. Housing and transport, because the houses I rent are not in main housing estates in the town. They tend to be rural located houses that are difficult to rent, but we have to rent them all year round. They're empty for a couple of months, and then our staff come back in and use them. They need to have transport then from those houses because they're not on bus routes.
Yeah.
And
how many people are you talking about outside?
About 60 people, come in. And we tend to bring in families, husbands and wives, sons, daughters, and they work well. They stay in the house together, or cousins or whatever, and they stay together. You designate one of them as the driver of the company minibus, and they'll do the runs to the shops, and the girls tend to gravitate towards the pack house, and the guys do the field work, and it works reasonably well. And if you have a disagreement, though, you lose set of 7 or 8 people or 4 people or whatever. But that's our model, and it has worked. So you've the labour challenge, you've the cost of inputs and the crisis we've gone through in the last 2 years. And again, we had never got a cost increase on our production since 2009. Bizarre that we went to 2021 before we saw a single increase, yet incrementally wages had gone up.
Sorry, you mean an increase in what you were getting from the
supermarkets for our product.
Okay.
And then the crisis got so bad, it became good, because we said, we're stopping. I'd rather go broke now than really go broke in 2 years' time or 1 year's time. So I'm not going to grow it. So there's a realisation that the food system was in trouble.
Yeah.
And collectively they all had to move to retails. And that, I suppose, it was a challenge, but it's ongoing. And, I'll delve into it a little bit deeper later on, but we'll just cover the immediate challenges. Land availability is a major challenge for us in our area. We're surrounded traditionally by bloodstock, dairy, some cereal growing, and there's a small amount in South Kildare of vegetable fodder beet, that maize for the production for anaerobic digesters. We're now being heavily competed by solar, and we see
solar panels,
solar farms. They are paying 2.5 times what we're being asked for in rent, and rapidly gaining traction with people who can get a 20-year long-term agreement, index linked, from these solar investment companies.
So hold on, I feel a bit sort of slightly conflicted about this, because solar is great. Like, we definitely need to move away from our reliance on fossil fuels and so on. But are we saying that, like, good quality food growing land is being snapped up and people are paying, like, outbidding farmers to put solar farms on this land?
100%. There's 1,000 acres directly in the vicinity of me. I'm working with 2 of those farmers, and I'm going to lose collectively about 200 acres of that I'm working. But also we're competing against crops grown for anaerobic digestion, and that's the same dilemma. Mm-hmm. We're taking good farmland, to produce energy crops, to produce biogas, and
and like at a time when the food supply, like, you've just given us examples of your colleagues, your peers in Spain and Portugal, where the challenges of, like, it might be unfarmable certainly from a broccoli perspective, and yet we're giving land over to producing energy. Now, I know, like, there's a trade-off here, but, like, that doesn't seem very smart for an island nation to be putting land into that.
No, but I suppose is there
And why is it going on good land as opposed to marginal land? Like that'd be the obvious point.
My point would be that they want to rehabilitate the bogs. Would they not put them, and then the bogs are rested, these farms are set up. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not an engineer, maybe that wouldn't be suitable. However, every roof in the country should be covered before they take good food producing land out of production. Every single roof.
Yeah.
And if you were not willing to put it on it, somebody should be putting it on your roof to utilise the free energy that's there.
A quick one. Now, I know you get asked on almost every podcast these days to hit that follow or subscribe button, but they never really tell you why that's important. Simply put, if you hit the follow button, it helps us to grow the show, get more great guests, and to reach more people just like you. So it's a small gesture from you that means a huge amount to us. Thanks. Now back to the episode. What's the other competition then? Because I know, because the nitrates directive for dairy farmers, can you explain what that means? Why does that mean dairy farmers are buying more land?
Well, they're not buying leasing or renting.
Land,
traditionally, and I could be corrected on the numbers here because I don't know I'm not a dairy farmer, but traditionally, if it was 1 cow to the acre and a man had 200 cows, he 200 acres, they have removed that derogation where the fertiliser that's produced from the cow, they now need 20% more land to have that cow. They either have to destock back to 80 cows or go to
240.
Exactly.
240 acres.
So you collectively put...
Same number of cows, more land.
You collectively put 100 dairy farmers in Kildare, South Kildare, into that, and you're taking thousands of acres that we're competing for. And it becomes a sort of a bidding war then, drives up our price, drives up the availability, and takes land that we traditionally had when the lease comes up, goes back to a
okay. So in the context then of you talked about rising costs in labour, you talked about, the price of the land is going up. Like, what about your inputs then? So, like energy, fertiliser?
Yeah. The war in Ukraine drove that off the scale. Yeah. We saw fertiliser triple in price. We saw energy quadruple in price. Fuel, diesel to run tractors and pumps, irrigation pumps, all substantially increasing. They've come back, but not to where they were.
Yeah,
we all think this year it's great. Fertiliser is only €600 a tonne. It was 900. However, 3 years ago it used to be 400, 450 for what we're using, and it hasn't come back to where it was, and never will. That has been built into the price of it now.
Yeah. We spoke to Jim Powers for Food Matters, the economist, and he showed us a graph that has the price of veg over the last decade, and it's gone down the way, and the input costs, presumably, as you've just outlined, have gone up the way. Mm-hmm. I remember you talking to me years ago about the supermarket price promotions that started to happen. They started as a Christmas thing, and I think most people will kind of remember that. They became kind of semi-permanent. How did that happen, and how was that sold to you originally? The fact that we're going to have 49-cent, carrots, parsnips, the sort of the classic Christmas plate of veg.
Well, first of all, it wasn't sold to us; it was forced down on us.
Okay,
we were told it was their embedded strategy to grow the sector. Now, it's a little bit like the solar panels. It's a little bit divisive. Take my crop, broccoli. My mother never bought a head of broccoli in her life because when she saw it in a supermarket, the head was probably €2, and she thought, "Oh no, that's very expensive. I have a family of 8 here, 6 kids and 2 adults to feed. I stick to the turnips and the cabbage." But when it was 49-cent, the purchasers who were traditionally not broccoli purchasers said, "I'll have a go at this."
Okay,
they liked it, and it grew the sector. However, a strategy that promotes a product on a calendar is a bit like farming by calendar. You can't decide 6 to 8 weeks out that we're going to do a promotion on broccoli on the first week in September, not knowing that the product is available. It worked traditionally when there was overproduction, 2010, 2015, starting to wane a little bit by 2020, so the 2-week promotions came back to 1-week promotions. And you saw, I suppose, the traditional promotion in a supermarket was a seasonal line. And you go back when there was a glut of strawberries, a glut of cauliflowers. We went back door to the supermarkets in those days. I'd speak to the charge handler and say, I have an awful amount of cauliflower next week. Can you do that for me? We'll do 2 for the price of 1. Meet me halfway on the costs. And an order in a supermarket would go from 50, 60 boxes in the week to maybe 200 boxes. And we'd know that we have enough to do that for that particular supermarket. And it worked well. It cleared surpluses. It gave people good value, and it didn't impact really negatively on a whole series of other lines. And by that point, I mean, if my broccoli is on promotion in a supermarket, be it a mainstream or a discount or whatever, the collateral damage of my product on other suppliers of fresh, perishable product is huge.
Okay.
And the damage that it does to the industry, and this is below cost selling, what we're talking about here. And the supermarket's argument is always, we pay you the full price. What's your gripe? But I'm supplying cauliflower and you're supplying broccoli, Mick, and you're on 49 cent. And that person who's buying the groceries goes into the shop, they buy 2 heads of your broccoli, and they leave me with my cauliflower. But that food waste is not captured in the recording of food waste. And as we know, food waste is the single biggest cause of environmental impact in our industry. And I'm not talking about things. If food waste was an economy, I think it'd be the third biggest in the world. So food waste, supermarkets are great for capturing it at their level, and if it goes above a certain level, they're straight on to us. I'll give you an example. One August weekend, we had a fridge malfunction, and our broccoli heated up over the August weekend, and the dispatch went out on the Sunday morning, unknown to us, that there had been a spike in temperature and the broccoli was going to transition from green to yellow in 24 hours.
Wow.
That hit 2 supermarkets. And on the Tuesday, I got a phone call to say, you're in red lights here. Your product is showing the highest waste levels of anything here. So they were very aware. They got through their QCs. And then they have quality controllers. Control, yeah. Then they have ownership of it. Legally, once it passes through their QCs, they have legal ownership of it, and they have to handle the waste. And it was all being thrown out. So first thing they do is they cancel all the orders for a couple of days, flush the product, but then do a root cause analysis with the supplier, whatever that product is. If it's breakdown in carrots because it's the end of the season, if it's parsnips going black, or whatever the issue, they'll do a forensic detail because it's costing them money. But nobody has any cognizance of what's going on at farm level and the crops that are left behind because they're out of spec, even though the product could be very, very scarce to them. And the collateral damage that happens from below cost selling is not picked up across the spectrum at all. And, you know, I'd love to get a way that we could measure it and just show how damaging that practice is to us. It also cheapens the product and the expectation... Permanently. Yeah. The expectation of the customer is, sure, they're cheap as chips to grow. Yeah. You know...
and if I got it for 49 cents, 3 weeks ago, why should I pay...
Yeah. Why should I pay $1.49 for today? Yeah. And, you know, I'm really disappointed that from a legislation point of view, when we got the 16 unfair trade practices brought in, that below cost selling was not one of those. Yeah. It is absolutely a missed opportunity. In 2007, the ban on below cost selling was lifted by Micheál Martin, the then Minister for Enterprise. I'm not blaming Micheál personally. That was probably in train before he got into government. You watch the figures of the decline in the numbers of growers in horticulture. It follows an exact pattern from that year to where we are today, from over 400 back then to less than 100 today.
Yeah, I heard Mike Neary from Borbia, who's I think head of the veg sector or the horticulture sector for Borbia, and he said in 1998 there were 400, and now there's less than 60 field scale growers. Yes. So I think the discrepancy there is probably the slightly smaller guys, is it?
There'd be a few guys wouldn't be captured in the those statistics, but they're part of the chain, and they're growing maybe 20 acres or 30 acres of veg. But if every town has a couple of those, or every city has a few of them, that collectively is they've probably been the ones that have taken the biggest hit. Yeah. And the likes of us, we've had to make a commercial decision. Do we invest in and keep going, or do we hang up our hat? But we're coming to a watershed here now, because my cohorts are all of a similar age as myself.
Yeah.
61, very few have family members going to go into it. They're not really saleable businesses, and we don't get vertical integration in the supply chain because there's too much risk involved because of the weather factor.
What do you mean by that, vertical integration?
Where a company that's in the supply chain above us will buy into our business to guarantee a supply of our product.
Yeah.
And they'll come down through the supply chain because they can't get it elsewhere. They do it in glasshouse crops. They do it in businesses where there's a particular product that they need, it's essential to their production or whatever, and they'll invest into a company that's supplying a service or a thing, so they have that supply.
Yeah.
It has happened in a few of the glasshouse, particularly in Holland, where some of the big glasshouse production companies, there's been vertical integration back down into the supply chain.
Do you have a son and heir or a daughter and heir coming through that could take over your business?
I have 3 children. My eldest girl is in Australia. My son studying engineering is taking a year out. And I have my youngest girl is doing business and management. They've all worked on the farm, give them a good work ethos and get a bit of cheap labour out of them. And they've all, concluded that it's very hard work for what you get back out of it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying some of them won't come back in, but would they start it up on their own? Never today. Economically, you could not do, and I'm not praising myself here, you couldn't do what I have done because the market has shifted so much and it's so competitive. You need access to €1 million to start a commercial vegetable business, and no bank, no institution would give you that money to do what they would consider a high risk.
Yeah. During, again, in Food Matters, we featured a grower who I know Cathal Lenihan, who had to close up shop. He was, I believe, one of the biggest cabbage guys in the state. Would he have been?
Biggest and the best, and he was a 3rd generation.
Yeah.
I'm a 1st generation, and it's really sad when you see somebody and the skill set of that. Cathal had 2 sons. Both of them studied either ag or hort in UCD, and they both got such good jobs in industry for chemical companies or whatever that Cathal couldn't match what they were being offered as students coming out of college.
Wow.
And he did the right thing. He made a good commercial decision, because he why would he flog himself to death and end up then his health will fail, or the whole thing comes in on top of you. And sometimes it's the right time to stop. It created great publicity for those that was left, and there was a lot of sympathy, but it waned off then as it does. And
one of the things that struck me, I mean, it was tragically sad actually standing chatting to him, because like a life's work, or 3 generations of life's work, as you say. But the other thing that struck me is like the expertise that he had and that you have in being able to produce, like, as I said, I can't keep 6 broccoli fucking bats alive, never mind 11 million. The generational expertise that's just walking out the door and will never be replaced. I mean, you don't like, if it's like a super tanker, we can't turn this around quickly if we suddenly find all these growers are gone and we can't get our veg from Spain. Where is the end point of that? Could we be in a situation where there's no Irish veg on the supermarket shelves?
I'd like, if I was Minister for Agriculture or Horticulture, I would demand a meeting with the CEOs, not the veg charge hands. They have a different remit. They have to make a profit in the supermarkets. But I would demand a meeting with the CEOs, and I'd say to them, I want your 5, 10 and 15 year food sourcing strategy in writing from your organisation, because they couldn't have one if what they're doing at the moment is undermining the supply chain. We're on the edge of Europe. We're going to be last to get our product. Yeah. Look at the empty shelves when we saw there when the salad crisis came. That wasn't because there was no salad in Europe. There was plenty of salad in Europe, but the Irish supermarkets were not willing to break their price point and they were the lowest bidders, and they were left without it.
Wow.
And the UK guys as well. And I was in France last week, and there was cauliflowers retailing for $3.49. The same cauliflowers are €2 here, $1.89, €2. They seasonally price product in continental Europe, and that is the correct way. They use price points here, and they all watch each other. And if broccoli is $1.49 and it's not available, they won't break the $1.49 and go out and say, well, we'll have it. They'll still maintain they have it, and it'll be on their lists or internet shop lists, and just come back as it's not available if you do your internet shopping. That system has destroyed production. Seasonal pricing rewards the risk taker. If it's early crop, he gets more money for it. If it's late crop, he's gambling frost, he gets more money for it. And the main crop. But that seasonal pricing, or all year round fixed pricing, why this model, and why they're not questioned by, people at a higher level than myself in their strategy as to, surely in normal market terms, if you want to buy a house and you go to an auction, it makes what the highest bidder is willing to pay. Yeah. Why are the prices left the same? It's easier for the buyers. They'd have to have probably 3 times the team in each supermarket, because they'd have to be reviewing pricing on a weekly basis. But they're obsessed with what each other is doing in the marketplace, and they won't move. And if one moves and backs somebody because they say, "Oh, well, I want to move, get the retails up because I can't supply," and they move. If after 3 weeks the others haven't moved, they move back down again, and that's the way, and that's wrong. That's not a true reflection of the way a market should work.
Yeah.
If a market is functional, it reflects the supply.
What role do consumers have here? Because I'm conscious, 99% of us buy our food from supermarkets. So I feel like there's a broader responsibility here as well. So what role can consumers play in this? I guess I know I've been criticised sometimes for saying, we need to be paying more for our food, or particularly our vegetables, or at least paying a price that's viable for everybody in the system. But what do you think consumers can do about this?
Well, first of all, if you ask the question, would consumers pay more for veg than they're currently paying? Why don't we ask them? Because the prices
they'll say no, right? Won't they?
Not necessarily, but we asked if the supermarkets asked them by putting the price up. So they move the price point up and reflect that increase back to the people that are producing. But they say people will resist it, but they don't put them up to see will they resist it.
Yeah.
And I believe the supermarkets have a role in this, because they get a percentage on their things. So the higher the price, the better their margin is. The higher the price for us, it keeps us in the business. And is 20 cent more on a head of cabbage, cauliflower, a kilo of carrots, is a lot to ask when a Mars bar or a bar of chocolate is twice the price of a piece of broccoli. I fail to understand how it's been cheapened so much.
Yeah.
And you talk about, people go into the supermarkets, and I'm an Irish grower, and I'm very conscious of what's on the shelf. But if I go in there and I'm in a rush and I'm trying to get home for 6 hours, now my family are probably a bit grown up. We don't have those school runs and different things on really tight schedules. But I go back to the day when I was in that situation and I had to pick up something for the dinner. I just want to get in and get out.
Yeah.
And maybe we don't ask the questions enough. And maybe the people that are in the shopping centre, they're asked the question on a vox pop and they answer it in what they aspire. But when you put that person in the supermarket,
in a real life scenario,
it's totally different played out. Or if they have children with them, and the children, I want to go home, or or the bus coming in with somebody from the school, going around and looking at the labels and everything, is aspirational. They won't do it. They're time poor, and
are we that time poor that we can't differentiate between an Irish head of broccoli and a Spanish head of broccoli? It says it on the label. In fairness, it's not going to take 15 seconds to figure that out. It's going to take 2.
I suppose, I don't know what the answer to that is.
Yeah. Right? How do you feel when you see? I mean, so your biggest competitor, presumably apart from other Irish broccoli growers, is where? Spain or Holland? Is it?
UK traditionally was the biggest competitor.
Right.
Now, this is pre-Brexit.
Okay.
And the UK,
And now?
the scale in the UK was huge, and they had a processing industry there, so there was a lot more produced than was needed for the fresh market. So there was always available product to be landed in here. Now they can't get the labour to harvest it. So that shift has moved away to Holland. But in the summer, there's no competition from Spain because it's too hot to grow broccoli. They can't produce it. Okay. Germany has gone too hot. They used to produce quite a bit of broccoli in Poland and in Germany, but it's got too dry and too hot. So the options for a buyer are becoming more and more limited. And that's why I think if they were long-term thinking, they'd say, we need to shore up this industry here, because in 10 years' time, Europe will be too dry and too hot. But not just broccoli. I mean, I'm talking about a range of crops here that just won't grow. Oh, lovely, courgettes, fennel, all those continental things. They'll be thriving in Europe, in Central Europe and in Northern Europe. And it'll be impossible. Spain could be a desert at that stage if the water dries up. But I think there's an opportunity, but we need the buy-in from the other members of the supply chain, and
from government, presumably.
And from government. Now, there's a plus and minus in my head on government. I don't want handouts. Now you might say, what's he saying that for? He must be making a fortune. I want the market corrected.
Yeah.
You know, we got a horticultural crisis fund, the HCF, and growers got paid some money to help. I could tell you the amount of buyers that asked me how much I got. To look for some of that back, you'd be frightened.
Wow. So they were trying to turn the screw on
Absolutely.
you.
Well aware of it.
Got a subsidy.
And I turned around, and my stock answer to the two that asked me was, what I got was to support me for last year. What I'm asking for is to continue producing for next year. And really, you know, it's none of your business, but it wasn't as blunt as that, but it isn't really. But I don't want handouts. I want... Yes, grants for technology advances, capital investments where you're making a long-term investment, but supporting a market that somebody's going to look for some of it back. Look at the cereal and the cap the way it is. You know, that has kept inefficient growers of cereals in the business where they should have been gone out of it years ago. Market supports aren't good. That was a cheap food policy that was brought in the 70s to try and keep food cheap and keep other parts of the economy going. We've moved on from that. You know, we want funding for, new investments that are highly risky. But we'd like, we'd like support from the government in legislation, and the below costs would be the only ask. I think it would correct so many things, but it's politically very unpalatable. Yeah. Particularly with an election coming up.
Yeah. Well, it's never a popular thing to say that we should pay more for food. Like that's the reality. I suppose just to kind of ask you this question, like, do you think empty supermarket shelves in terms of veg and fruit particularly are a feature of our future or not?
Yes, I do. And I think they're necessary to create the awareness, because once the public come in and see the empty shelf, the first thing they say to the manager or manageress in that supermarket is, why is there no broccoli? The farmers are out protesting up and down the M50 that you won't pay them enough. Now, there might be dairy farmers, but the public's perception is we're all farming community. Yeah. Why aren't you paying enough for it? It's maybe it's needed in the short term to create the awareness, and but I do think we're going to see some of it, particularly with climate change and these swings that we're getting in weather. So we get a prolonged drought, and if the rivers run below a certain level, even we have all the gear to pump the water. If the water isn't there, we can't extract it, and if we can't dry the rivers either and kill the fish. So we have to be very, very responsible, and we have to, in our case, we have to log everything we take, and we have to put down our abstraction points before we take and state the amount of water we're taking from a particular river. So it's not just we, just throw a hose over the fence and take whatever we want out of it. We have to be very, very mindful of what's going on around us.
Yeah. Should I, like, I'm guessing the answer, like, if I see a Spanish in the middle of August, if I see like your broccoli and Spanish broccoli or whatever, like obviously I should take the Irish one. But beyond November, between November and, is it April? You said is your first note?
June.
May, June.
Yeah,
like, do you like me buying Spanish broccoli at that stage?
I think you should examine what other Irish seasonal veg is available, because I think it's very important that we eat seasonally. I think that's one of the things we've lost, but that's another hobby horse of mine, which is education, and a lot of our problems go back to education and taking food out of the curriculum. But I think we should look at seasonality, and I think if we had an environmental labelling where we were able to put something like we have on our washing machines and dishwashers, that the further it travels and the more scarce those resources are, be it water in Spain, it gets a heavier labelling, which is just an indicator. You can make an informed decision then. Do you want that broccoli? And look, maybe you're cooking something special for people that are coming over and you want that broccoli as an integral part of your dinner menu. That's fine, but it should be priced accordingly.
Yeah. Do you worry about things like keeping making broccoli sexy? You know what I mean? If it's seen as a sort of the classic sort of meat and two veg that it's like there on the side of the plate with your roast chicken or whatever, like that, to a new generation of people who are getting the recipes on Instagram, whatever, you have to kind of keep up with that. Particularly you, because you're so invested in broccoli. Like, do you worry about that kind of side of it? That is, well, you know,
it's the first time I've ever heard the word broccoli and sexy in one sentence. I think we use the word desirable.
Right, fair enough. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I think you know, that's again public awareness and education, getting people back to know where their food comes. And you do a great job in it with the programs you do and the informing people, but we've got to get it back into the schools. You know, these kids of 5 and 6 that start learning about where their food is coming from, in 20 years' time they're making the purchase decisions in their household, and if they're well informed, and you know, if they have, you know, the basic information, what they say, that there's what's the difference between knowledge and wisdom, and knowledge is known that a tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is known not to put it in a fruit salad. And if they have the knowledge of the damage that below cost selling is doing, that eating out of season is doing, they'll have the wisdom then to support us when they're making those purchases. And that's a long buy-in, but you know, if we don't start now and get it back into the curriculum, we do civics and we do all that type of thing, but we eat 3 times a day, Michael, and you know, we have to have nutritious and wholesome food available to us, or we're going down a very, very dangerous route of health issues.
I have 3 questions left for you, Paul.
Right.
We'll keep these kind of rapid fire. Like, first of all, your favourite way to eat broccoli?
I love it stir fried with ginger and garlic and a little bit of sweet chili sauce and soy sauce. That would be my sexy broccoli dinner. I'd have that all day, every day.
That sounds really, really good. I love the sound of that. So second question I have for you then is, like, if you had one takeaway for, if you had minister sitting here, consumer sitting here, supermarket CEO sitting here, what would you say to each of them?
Stop below cost selling.
That's to the supermarket guy
to
and the government guy.
Bring in regulation that it underpins what we need. And what's absolutely, it's proven by since the statistics when we removed the ban for fruit and veg, bring it in.
Yeah, and to the consumer?
The consumers, ask the question. If it's not there, keep asking, because that's what the supermarkets react to.
Yeah, we
can campaign and we can do what we like with our tractors. It's the public questions of where it's coming from, why.
Yeah. And consumers have tremendous power to vote with their wallets, don't they?
They are the purchasers. They have all the power.
Okay. And last question, why does food matter to Paul Brophy?
Food matters, I suppose, because I said we eat 3 times a day. We all strive to be healthy and have a good life. Nothing else matters, but we put food inside us. I might aspire to have a designer label on my shirt and drive a nice car. That's all superficial. You get a person who's got type 2 diabetes because they've overindulged in unhealthy food, not because of genetics or whatever else, that they've just taken the wrong lifestyle choices. They don't do it all again, and they would eat healthily. And I believe, again, go back to the schools, embed it into the curriculum from junior infants, and an awareness of what we eat and what it does for us and what it doesn't do for us. We don't.
Brilliant. Paul, thanks a million for joining me.
And thank you, Michael.
That's it for this episode of Food Matters, but we would love you to get more connected to the GIY universe. So we believe that our food system is having a catastrophic impact on people's health and the health of our planet, and we think a movement of people growing some of their own food is the way to fix it. You can stay connected to GIY by signing up to our free newsletter and check out our full range of events, campaigns, resources and courses at giy.ie. Check out the show notes for more information. Thanks for listening and see you soon.